Welcome back to A Fresh Story, the podcast where we have conversations about brave decisions to start over again. I'm Olivia.
And I'm Jenny, and we're so glad you're here today.
Hello, sister. Have you watched the local news lately in Scotland?
I haven't. I don't even know where I'd access the local news. And either way, I don't think any local news anchor will ever get into my heart the way that like Ernie Anastos and like Sade Better-en-Moi and you know.
By the way, do you know how long it took me to Google that name the other day? I couldn't spell it.
Sade, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Better-en-Moi. And then like we have like Janine Pirro, like all these people that are like local. Not Janine Pirro, she's a judge. Rosanna Scotto is who I met.
Rosanna Scotto.
But all these people that are like local news anchors, they're so big in our lives and they loom so large. And we it was very cool talking to Liz Brunner, who is one for the Boston area. I think luckily, because we're not from Boston, we were able to be normal people. I don't think I could be a normal person around Sade Better-en-Moi. Like
Sade!
These are names that like
yeah,
they're part of your
sort
of like
you wake up with them every day, right? You wake up.
And if you take cabs in the city, like they're on they're the people in the cabs with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think exciting. Al Roker is the best person in the world. I know he's not local, but we love Al Roker. I do.
We saw him once. We
did. He lived in our grandfather's building. I love Al Roker, but I love our local news. And I think that it goes back to the local news is so important. And again, like these are the people you do, like they support you as you start your day. And so Liz
They're who tells you if you have school or not that day.
That is true.
Snow day.
That is true. They are your snow day angels. So Liz Brunner came on the show. She has her own podcast that we were also on.
Yes.
We talked a lot about, making that big career change and deciding to take that risk and leaving
she's a say
everything.
Yes person.
Yeah, she is a say yes person. Also, like the most composed adult. Like, I'm like, I want to be like Liz Brunner when I grow up. Like, everything about her was so.
We're never going to be like Liz Brunner when we grow up.
With Liz Brunner, we love you. And you're so grown up.
She pulls off a shift dress like so well.
She's like an adult. She's like an adult.
Earrings. She smells amazing. Like, it's just,
her hair is
she's
always
poised
perfect.
and composed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Liz, we stand for Liz.
Inside and out, yes.
Inside and out. She is a fantastic human. So please enjoy this episode with Liz Brunner. And please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to A Fresh Story so we can keep telling fresh start stories. Liz Brunner is a certified professional coach and the CEO and founder of Brunner Communications and best-selling author of Dare to Own You, Taking Your Authenticity and Dreams into Your Next Chapter, recommended on Forbes. Leveraging more than 35 years of media and communications experience, expertise, and leadership, Brunner is sought by high-profile individuals and organizations to build meaningful reputations and powerful brand identities within their markets. She is also a keynote speaker at corporate conventions, including Stifel, the Barron's Women's Summit, the CoreNet Global Summit, as well as numerous colleges and universities. In February 2020, Liz launched her podcast, Live Your Best Life with Liz Brunner, where guests share their stories of recreation, transformation, and how they have created their next chapters, inspiring others to live their best, most authentic lives as well. In 2022, Liz's podcast won multiple awards for Best Host and Best Lifestyle Podcast by the Communicator Awards. I was going to say, I know this all to be true because we were guests on your podcast and you are a wonderful host. And so we're very happy to have you here today, Liz.
Well, first of all, thank you very much to both of you for having me on. And, it's funny when I hear that bio read sometimes, I'm like, okay, you don't need to say all of that, but that's okay. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
It's all true. It's funny. We talk about that sometimes. Like, it's funny to watch people hear their bio get read back to them because it's so, you're like, I did all of that? That was all me?
I know when I've had guests on my show and I try to create a little bio about their life and they say the same thing to me. I'm like, did I really do all of that? Yes,
exactly.
You did. Yes, you did.
It's good. It's like affirming to have it read back.
It is. Thank you for doing that.
It is. And I was going to say, I love your show because it's so in line with what we do over here, right? It's like these next chapters and fresh starts and, the new pages of your life. And so we always are fascinated by those pivots that people make. And I know that you are as well.
Well, that's why I had you guys on my show, because you guys are all about fresh starts and just all these different chapters in your life. And so that's why I had you on as guests on my show.
I know. We loved it. Great. We loved it. You asked questions.
It was great. Yeah. And how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. It's a beautiful fall day here in Boston, which is where I live, and the sun is out today, and it actually is going to supposedly get up into the 80s, which I
heard
love.
that.
So I'm happy about that. We don't have too many more days like that coming along.
You do
I
not.
like the fall.
Yeah. The fall in Boston too. I mean,
yeah, there's nothing like it.
Well, perfect. Why don't you take us back to the beginning of your Fresh Start story?
When I think about my fresh starts story, I feel like I have had many fresh starts, both personally and professionally. I went to college to become a music teacher, and I was a high school music teacher. I sang semi-professionally, toured Europe, sang for Pope John Paul II, even in Vatican Square. Pretty amazing. But I felt like there was something more that I was supposed to do. Now, I had absolutely no idea what that was, but I bravely left teaching without really having a path. I worked in retail for a time, so I consider my teaching profession sort of chapter one, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Worked in retail for a couple of years, had to pay the bills. I did really well. I was actually very successful in sales, so I was glad about that. But that was also a wonderful learning opportunity, and that was chapter 2. Chapter 3 of a career pivot was when I got into television. When I was trying to think about what I wanted to do after teaching, I was reading this wonderful book called Who's Hiring Who by Richard Lathrop. And he talked about these informational interviews. Now, I'd never heard of such a thing, but I began thinking, okay, who could I talk to if I thought I wanted to do something in television? And where that idea came from was probably only because I had done one television commercial when I was Miss Illinois in the Miss America Scholarship Pageant. Now, I don't even think that commercial ever made air, but that was my only real taste of television other than the pageant itself. I bravely called 2 stations up in the Champaign-Urbana, Illinois area, which is where I was living at the time. And I said, well, what does somebody like me do? What does somebody like me have to do to get into television? I think I want to do public relations, but I don't know. Do I need to go back and get a degree in journalism or broadcasting? And basically the answer was no. But that was a long time ago. That may be different today. Fast forward a little bit, and a position was literally created for me at the CBS affiliate. And I was the community relations liaison. Doesn't that sound exciting?
It does.
Very fancy.
Basically, I was there to help our on-air reporters and anchors get out into the community, do speaking engagements. I worked with all the nonprofit organizations, helping them publicize their events, even if it was a pancake breakfast. And one thing led to another, and they said, well, we want you to write these. Well, I didn't know how to write them. I learned how to write these PSAs. And then it went to, well, we want you to voice these. And I had to go into the sound booth, and I was petrified. I'm like, today.
You do have a great voice. You do.
Thank you. Well, classic. Okay, so all my music voice training, I think about that, how that crosses through everything. And thank you for saying that, by the way. And so one thing led to another, and I ended up being on television. Then I started doing the weather on TV. And one thing led to another. I was there for 3 years. Then I went to Tampa, Florida. Champaign-Urbana, then to Tampa, Florida. I was in Tampa, Florida, became a morning anchor there, doing the eye-opener newscast, getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning and going into work at 4. I mean, crazy hours, because the Tampa station had hired me as the director of community relations. I was not an on-air position, but within a year, they tapped me to also be the morning anchor. I literally was working about 70, 80 hours every single week. Wow. Exhausting. Now, the next pivot came when I took myself off the air And I stayed with the management job, and I said, if God wants me to be back on the air, it's going to happen. And about a year later it did, when I got the call to come to Boston, and it was for this wonderful news magazine show called Chronicle. And so I was on Chronicle for a year before I got tapped to be in the news department, again, wearing two hats. I must have a sign on my back that says, please give me two jobs to do at the same time.
You just can handle it.
I guess. Well, eventually I went full-time news. And so I was at Channel 5 in Boston, the ABC station, for 20 years. Cumulatively, the television industry of 28 years. So this is chapter 3.
Well, I have a question, Liz.
Yes.
Going back to like when they created this position for you at the first, it was that CBS, right? You said the CBS affiliate.
Station.
When you called them and you were like, what do I do? What do I need to do to come like work for you and all this? Did you keep a relationship with them? Like how did that go from having that phone call to them creating a position for you?
It interestingly enough, this is a funny story because I had that conversation and then I had an appointment to go in and meet a woman who was the creative services director. And I was still working in retail. And I remember this woman came into the store. This is days before my interview in person. And I'm thinking, I don't know her, but I just had this gut feeling I needed to really pay attention to her. Mm-hmm. Well, lo and behold, it was the woman that I was having the interview with. She didn't tell me that when she came into the store. It was only when I met her in person that I went, wait a minute, you were just in the store a few days ago. And she admitted that she came in to meet me under those circumstances.
Wow.
And she liked me enough, thank God.
You knew to be your best self. Yeah.
Right.
That's like a movie moment.
And then it literally, this position was created. It didn't exist.
Right.
And I didn't know how to do anything that they were telling me to do and asking me to do. And this has happened throughout my career journey. And my philosophy has always been, just because you have never done something doesn't mean you can't. You just have to try.
Yeah.
And we women get hung up. We women get hung up. Oh, well, I haven't done it before. I've got to make sure I have experience in doing it and cross every T and dot every I. No, exactly. I always say to people, don't let them tell you no, right? Like you can decide if it's something that you want to pursue, right? But don't let them say no to you. Just say yes and figure it out. You just have to, I was also a teacher, Liz. That was my first chapter too, right? And I always say, you just have to be one page ahead of the kids, right? Nobody knows. Right. You just have to be one page ahead and then you can figure it out from there. So what was it like being in the news for almost 3 decades? What did you get from that? Well, it's a fascinating industry and I love storytelling. And so for me, that was really the thread, if you will. And I didn't figure this out until I was now in my 4th chapter, which we'll get to, which is what I'm doing now. But the through line really is about using your voice and telling a story. When I was teaching high school and singing semi-professionally, I was teaching storytelling through song. I was singing storytelling and using my voice through song.
Right.
When I was on television as a reporter, journalist, news anchor, I was sharing other people's stories. I was giving them voice. Now, in this career chapter, as a communications coach and a keynote speaker and a podcast host, and even with my book, with my clients, I am teaching them how to tell their own story, how to use their own voice. And with my book and with my sort of keynote speaking chapter that I'm just sort of launching, professional keynote speaking chapter, now I'm using my voice. Now I'm telling my story.
Right.
So that's when you think about it, because people always say, how did you go from, being a high school teacher to being on TV to doing what you're doing? Well, that's the through line. It's all storytelling and using your voice.
I was just saying this yesterday to a friend who's in marketing, and she was saying that she had been in marketing doing a lot of like mom brands and baby brands, and then now she's doing tech brands. And I said, but the thread that runs through everything, everybody has like a thread, like you're saying, right? Is that like for me, right? My thread is that we're all about making people feel less alone and eliminating the overwhelm. So whether you're working for a tech brand or a baby brand, or you're speaking at PBS or NBC or whatever it is, right? Your thread is going to be the same. And I think that's such an interesting thing that we don't talk about that enough. But you know, yeah.
It's one of the things that I also love working with my clients on is helping them discover and uncover what are the themes and patterns that run through your life. How can you connect those dots? Because when you do, when you are able to step back and put yourself in that witness position and really begin to see, okay, what were the skills? What were the themes? What were the patterns? You can create another chapter for yourself. You can start over again.
Yeah.
You can have that fresh start.
Yeah, I love that. So concurrently, right, you with this time at the news, you also, I'm assuming, had a life. So what did you do? Like, what was your personal life like when you were putting in all these hours? Because that's a big chunk of your life, your adulthood. So what was that like, that span of time?
Well, it's very interesting because it is a challenge. And at the time, particularly when I was here in Boston, I was married to a man who had 3 children, and I helped raise those 3 children. And those are his words. Okay. And although he and I are not together anymore, I still have a relationship with all 3 of them. But the hard part was that I was in the public eye.
Yeah.
And that's a huge thing. And I was very cognizant of that here I am, I walk into a grocery store, people know my name and they're like, oh, Liz, how are you? And I always wanted it to be about them. I wanted it to be about the family. I can only control so much of that. And it's one of the reasons why when I would go to the grocery store, for example, I didn't look like, quote unquote, Liz Brunner on TV news anchor. My hair would be in a ponytail, no makeup on, and sweats. I just wanted to be Liz. And I wanted them to see me as just Liz. And I was always very cognizant of that being able to just be me and having them see just that piece of me, the real me, so that I could forge that relationship with them. But it was not easy. And the expectations that were put on me, not only me, but on all of us when you're in that industry, there's a lot that is expected of you.
Yeah.
And so it is hard to balance. But, I'm not the only one that struggled with balancing personal and professional. It's, every woman, every man that I know struggles with, how do I do this? How do I find the right balance? And I don't know if there ever is. I mean, there are times when you have to pay more attention to the professional side and other times when you have to pay more attention to the family side. There really isn't balance. It's just every day is different. You just do it.
I'm so fascinated by this. And now that you're in front of me, I'm going to just pick your brain about this transition from being a lay person to a public person. Right. And we see a little bit of this, like, in our own press and things like that, and when I go to my kids' school, we're not celebrities by any means, but they'll be like, oh, I saw on Facebook that you were in this or that. Right. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's cool. Right. What is that transition like to go from just being Liz out in the world and you're doing this thing to people recognizing you in the supermarket? How did you, process all of that? Did you have support in processing that? That's fascinating to me, that transition.
The first piece of that is this. I was grateful and thankful that they did recognize me, which meant that they were watching, which meant the ratings were good, which meant I still had a job.
Yes. Number one.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Let's
we love
look
that.
at it from that perspective.
Yes.
And the other piece that was often fun is people would say, oh, I, go to bed with you every night, or I wake up with you every morning, or you're in my kitchen because the TV set was on.
Right. Right.
So you have to appreciate that.
Yeah.
But the thing that has always stuck with me the most, and I was most proud of, was when people would say to me, I know you have to deliver bad news sometimes, but somehow coming from you, I feel like things are going to be okay. That's the best compliment someone can give me.
Yeah.
Because what that told me is they saw me as a real person. Yes, I was doing my job, but they saw me as a real person. Some people did see me as a real person, and others, oh my God, they got kind of crazy with me. But, that's everywhere, that, anyone who's a public figure, you do have to kind of figure out how you can do that. And you can control some of what people see and what people hear. And I'm a very private person, believe it or not.
Yeah.
So trying to, again, find that right balance. It's not always easy.
No, of course not. That's fascinating. And I appreciate your honesty with that. So and I love that. I think that that's like the definition of authenticity, right? Is that you can be yourself and provide this safe space for people and deliver the news, but also be your private self too, and being able to balance that public persona and the private persona.
One of the things that I talk a lot about, whether it's in my keynote speeches, whether it's in my book, whether it's with clients, is authenticity and vulnerability and what the difference is between the two. Because to me, authenticity is about you're true to your core values. Mm-hmm. Your words and your actions are in sync. There's never a question about your behavior. Right. When it comes to vulnerability, it's not about wearing your heart on your sleeve for everyone to see and you're all this emotional thing. Yes, you can be emotional, but vulnerability to me is that you share your stories with the people who have earned the right to hear them. Very big difference.
Yeah. Boom. Yeah.
I love that. Olivia and I talk a lot about authenticity and intimacy and how we like to be very authentic with, the people that we share with and with our Instagrams and stuff like that. But I won't trade intimacies with people on the internet. Like I'm you said it, you're very private. I'm also like private and people are always surprised to hear that. I'm like, well, you barely saw a picture of my husband's face until, I've shared one photo from the wedding. Like I didn't post that day. Like it was intentional. I did not want to trade that intimacy for likes. That was not something. It's authentic. You know my story, but you don't know the intimacies behind it. And that's important to me because that's what our relationships, my personal relationships, that's their coal. That's what fires them.
And I think that's a very key thing is, just knowing what the boundaries are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Knowing what the boundaries are. And those boundary lines are different for everybody. And I'm not saying they're right. I'm not saying they're wrong.
But you have to identify yours.
You have to identify your own boundaries of what you're comfortable with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what you have to stick to. Again, that's sticking to being authentic to your core values. And so, yes, the two of them go very much hand in hand with authenticity and vulnerability, but finding the right balance is so important.
So, important. Now, what year did you start on TV?
Oh, let me think back. I don't even remember. So
give me the decade.
4 decades ago now, because I was, or 4 decades, because I was in television 80s? For nearly. Yeah, I think so, because I've been in my business for 10 years, which is absolutely shocking to me. Then you add 30 years on to of being in television. So 40 years ago is when I got into television. I want to say my mid-20s. Yeah, my mid-20s.
Yeah, I was going to say, you must have been young.
And I asked that because I'm thinking about the concept of public versus private person. And what it meant to be on TV in the 80s is very different than what it meant to be on TV in the 2020s, 2010s, right? Because you were on and then you went home and nobody was following you on social media. It must have been very exciting for them to see you, but you could put your hair in a ponytail and kind of change your look. And so as you came up, so did social media. And I wonder, if you felt that.
Yes. And I was very late to the social media game. I'm like, who needs this?
Why would you want it?
Why would you want this? But now I see the value in it.
Yeah.
And do some people go overboard? Of course. Again, that's that boundary piece we just spoke about.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact of the matter is that's the world we live in. And the whole industry of television has changed dramatically from when I got into it, even from what we wore on TV, how we wore our hair. I mean, you never saw a woman as a news anchor being sleeveless in a dress. It was always, a jacket professionally, because we had to, quote unquote, maybe look like a man to be taken seriously. And now I look at some of the news anchors. I'm like, okay, are we doing the news? Or are we going to the nightclub right now? I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
It's very different.
It is. Yeah. So you were in the news, your career was in the news. And then what was the impetus for this next big pivot in your life?
Well, the industry was dramatically changing, for one. And the other piece of it was that a lot of the stories that I did were the big exclusives, and they took a lot of time. I mean, it took me 4 years to get the interview with President Barack Obama. And people actually made fun of me in the newsroom. They're like, oh, there goes Liz right into the White House again, trying to get this interview. Hey, I got it. I was the only Boston reporter that did. But it takes time for those kinds of stories. And, I'm not going to do a story that's a minute long with someone who's had a face transplant or a double hand transplant. I mean, these were powerfully transformational stories. Those were the ones I really enjoyed doing. And they were also exclusive. So it just takes a little bit more time to nurture those.
Right.
And the other piece, as I said, about the business changing, I mean, when I started, stories were so much longer. You could really be in depth with them. And today, a package story, as we call it, is probably a minute, 10 seconds long. That's not a lot of time. And I also was looking around at me going, the women are getting younger, and I'm not. The men are getting older, and they're still there. I needed to really think about, I'm still young enough, in my opinion. What else could I do? And so I was quietly, confidentially talking to people in the community for 2 years, asking them, what does somebody like me do? What do you think I could do besides TV? What do you think my skill set is? Their answers were always entertaining. Some of them would say to me, well, I see you read the news every night. Trust me, it's more than just reading the news.
You're not reading a script, yeah.
And others would say, well, maybe you could do this, maybe you could do that. What I learned through that whole process was I had to learn to speak their language. In other words, business or corporate language. TV has their own language.
Right.
Breaking news in television might be crisis management in the corporate world. Being a project manager in the corporate world is very much like being a producer or a reporter in the television world. Those skills are the same. So you talk about themes and patterns and connecting dots. I had to figure out what those skills were that I could translate to their language. And once I began doing that, then I realized, okay, there are 3 paths I think I could go down. One, I could be some communications expert for a corporation. I don't know who. Number 2, I could be maybe an executive director for a nonprofit, although I'd never done that. I've been always very involved in nonprofit organizations. Or I could launch my business. I could teach people about public speaking, presentation skills, storytelling, leadership. Oh, yes, media training too.
Yeah.
And when I shared this 3-lane approach with one of my mentors, one of those people I'd been talking to for 2 years, he said, Liz, you're well known. You're well respected. You have credibility. That is value.
Yeah.
Why would you give that value to somebody else? Launch your business. If in 6 months or 9 months you don't like it, you don't have any clients, you can always go do something else.
Right.
Ladies, a kaleidoscope went click. And in that moment, I knew that I would launch my business. And I had to do it right away because I was petrified. I never wanted to own my own business. I've never ever wanted to do that.
Yeah.
And while I had been playing around with some website stuff and some photos and a logo that I had given to a marketing company, I said, you got 6 months to a year. I'm not going to do anything. I called them up that day and I said, remember when I said you had 6 months? I said, you have 6 weeks. You have 6 weeks to pull this together because if I don't do it, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
I truly felt like I was jumping off of a cliff, hoping that I would have a parachute, at least when I went skydiving once I did have a parachute. And so really for me, that was an extremely pivotal moment. And when you think about fresh starts, think about this. From my high school teaching career to working in retail to my television career to this business. And now yet I'm sort of having yet another transition to really becoming a professional keynote speaker.
Right.
Those are major pivots throughout your life, fresh starts that you have to have the courage to do. You have to give yourself permission to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it all comes down to that you are worthy.
Yes.
Right. You are worthy of fulfilling your joy and enlightenment. I've really been thinking a lot about enlightenment as a person lately, right? What does that mean? How do we fill our cups and how do we have other people help us do that and support us? So I love that you did take these leaps. So what was it like? What were the next 6 weeks like? And then you launched your business.
Well, I had made a decision with my television station to keep it private because I didn't want people coming up to me and asking me, oh, my mom. I just was like, let me be at work and do my job. Let me be at home and get this website up and going with my marketing team. And we figured out a date when we were going to announce it. Now, this got kind of tricky because the Red Sox at the time were in the playoffs, and I certainly didn't want to announce it on a day when they were playing. I would get totally lost. So we figured out the best day to make the announcement, and then it was going to be a week later that I would leave. And so once it was public, and then I left a week later, I'm so grateful because when we finally did announce it, and the night that I left, within that first 24 hours, we had more than 1,000 hits on my website, which was amazing. And I literally went to New York the very next day with my very first client.
It's amazing.
So it was just like I was shot out of a cannon when it started. And in many respects, I was on a treadmill for the first 5 or 6 years that was going so fast, I wasn't sure how I was going to keep up. I wasn't sure how or if I could get off.
Yeah.
And so it was really, I mean, it was very exciting. I was thrilled with the initial success, but it was terrifying at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and then how did that pivot into what you're doing now? Because you worked with clients all the time and then.
Right. Well, before the pandemic, I was on a plane, literally crisscrossing the country every single week, I should say, to work with people either one-on-one or in workshops. And so it was really, really crazy busy. And then things started to shift a little bit just before the pandemic. And all of my coaching friends were like, what's going on? The market's doing fine. Why are things shifting? And then COVID happened. And every single client that I had on my calendar through June was gone. And I didn't know if I would be able to survive. And I didn't pay myself for the entire year of 2020 until December, because I felt it was more important to pay my team to help me stay afloat. And, you know, all the clients were disappearing and I was trying to find new ways to help them. And ultimately it did work because a lot of clients were like, wait a minute, we used to do these things in person. We don't know how to do virtual well at all.
Yeah.
And so, you know, my media background was incredibly beneficial and helpful in that regard. Now, the challenge also became that I needed to get a PPP loan of some kind, you know, from the government. And, you know, one of the big banks that I was working with, even though I gave them every piece of documentation that I was still in business and I did have some clients paying me, I couldn't get a PPP initially. And so that was really hard. And I did get a loan, which I'm still paying back.
Yeah.
And so then, you know, things shifted. I started doing virtual work as opposed to in-person work, like everybody. We all had to pivot. We all had to find a way to continue to grow. And I'm sure you guys can relate to this as well.
Yeah.
A lot of people can. Another fresh start, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And so from there, then I just started my podcast in February of 2020. And I'm really glad I did that. And I had been planning on starting an online learning platform in 21, but I fast forwarded it and did it in 2020. And then in 2021, that's when I picked up writing my book again, because I had put it down. And so I started writing my book. I shouldn't say started writing. I picked up my book and finished the book in 21, and it was published in 21 in November. And so that whole year, in many respects, I was very grateful that I wasn't on a plane every single week crisscrossing the country. I had the time to do that. And I don't think I would have before then. And so here we are 10 years in. How did that happen? I honest and truly, when I started my business, I wasn't thinking down the road, down the road, 10 years down the road. I was just trying to figure out how the heck to build a business. And here I am 10 years in. I'm like, oh my gosh.
That's amazing. And it's so cool that you get to like still do what you love to do and work with people and use your voice and use all of your skills. And I say this all the time, but I'm sure you still bring in so much from your teaching background and, you know, everything that you've done, retail, like it all, Jenny and I, we always say it's like the Guggenheim. You spiral, right? You go and like you get this beautiful, and you're in a beautiful art museum and we always say you're Guggenheiming, right? And so it's like everything is like plays off of each other and you couldn't have done this without doing that. So I think that that's such a beautiful part of for anybody's fresh start journey, but especially yours to see that.
But that's why I like to call it recreation as opposed to reinvention, because I do believe we take skills from every opportunity we have had and we carry them forwards to create that next chapter. Are we still learning new things? Absolutely, yes. But it's not a complete flip of 180 where you're learning everything entirely new.
Right.
And when we are able to recreate and we take all the lessons from every experience we have had personally, professionally, from even childhood. What did you want to be when you grew up? And carry all of that forward. We recreate our lives. We use that knowledge, and we are able to take ourselves into our next chapter, have that fresh start. And we know more than we think we know. And we have to trust that and tap into that. And that's not always easy to do.
No, it's not. So if somebody's going through a fresh start, Liz, what would be some wise words that you could impart to them?
I would first say, take yourself and put yourself in that witness position and really look at all of those experiences that you've had and see if you can figure out, okay, how can I carry myself forward? Number one. Number two, give yourself permission to do that. That may be the first step, is give yourself permission to even consider something else. And if you are already going through a fresh start, maybe you've made a major pivot, maybe you've made a major decision personally or professionally, own that as hard as it is. Find people who will support you in this next chapter, because not everybody may support you. It's not going to be easy. Change is often very, very hard, and we get stuck in our ways. We get stuck in what's comfortable. It is not easy to make that fresh start. So if you've given yourself that permission, hang in there. Find people who will support you to do that and continue to own more of who you are. And that's not always easy. It's not always easy. I'm still learning how to own more of me. I'm 64 and I'm still learning how to own more of me. But that's when we learn to be able to live our best lives, to be our best selves. And that's what my goal is right now, to both personally and professionally. I want to be able to teach and motivate and inspire people to live their best life, whatever that means for them, because there's a different definition for every single one of us.
I love that. It's so wise. That's perfect. And then the hardest question of all is, and you're in a good food place, so I want to hear a good answer here. What was the last thing that you ate and truly loved?
Oh, that's really a hard one. I love food, first of all. I love food. And I'm known to be a pretty healthy eater. Let's just put it that way. I will say my favorite food is a porterhouse steak. I haven't had one in a while. I've had fillets, but my favorite is a porterhouse steak. So I might have to have one of those very, very soon.
You know what? You should.
What do you get aside when you get a porterhouse?
I actually think that because my official 10th year anniversary is on October 17th, 2023. I'm going to have a porterhouse steak that night.
Good. Do it.
Perfect.
Do it. I love that. Well, Liz, you are so inspiring. And, your journey is so inspiring, and you're so... You have this confidence about you that is so authentic, like we said, but so welcoming and warm. And I know, you've always made us feel so welcome and accepted in, all of the communities that we run in together. And I'm just so excited to see what you do next, because you're always coming up with some new venture and, awesome things that you can support people in. So thank you for being here and for doing what you're doing. And we're just really honored to have you in our circle.
Well, I'm honored to be joining your circle. I greatly appreciate it. And the journey's not over. The journey for all of us is not over, as long as we continue to learn and grow every single step along the way, because there's always a lesson. Sometimes they're easier than other times, but there's always a lesson for us to continue to grow and move forward and live our best lives. So thank you for the opportunity to share that.
Thank you for listening to today's story. We're always here, and we're so proud of you.
A Fresh Story is produced by Fresh Starts Registry, the first and only platform for everything you need to begin again. You can read the show notes and learn more about today's episode at afreshstory.com.